6, 6, 16, 8. 8. 8 or 8? Oh, gosh. God, that's crazy. Oh. I'm so tired. Getting old. Jai Radha Ballabha. Jai Guni Jai Jai Jagadar Baladev Sabbath Jai Prabhupada. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. We've forgotten the words. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tirabhanachari. Jamuna Tirabhanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janarangana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Hasto Tarasarasri Śrīmad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Grantaraj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki Nitai Gaura Premanandi Namo Vishwadaya Krishna Namo Vishwadaya Krishna Buddha Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Guru Varim Pacharane Nivasesha Sunyavadi Pascha Jate Satarane Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So today we're reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 6. What is Canto 6? Instructions? Prescribed duties for mankind. Chapter 16. King Chitraketu meets the Lord. Text number 8. Evam yoni gato jivaha. Okay, let's do that again with a bit more heart. Evam yoni gato jivaha. Sa nityo nirahankritaha yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasyatat evam yoni gato jivaha sa nityo nirahankritaha yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasyatat evam yoni gato jivaha sa nityo nirahankritaha yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasyatat Yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasya tat. Evam yoni gato jivaha sanityo nirahankritaha yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasya tat. Evam yoni gato jivaha sanityo nirahankritaha yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasya tat. Evam yoni gato jivaha sanityo nirahankritaha yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasya tat. Evam yoni gato jivaha sanityo nirahankritaha yavad yatro palabhyeta tavat svatvam hitasya tat. Evam, thus, yoni gataha, being within a specific species of life. Jivaha, the living entity. Saha, he. Nityaha, eternal. Nirahankritaha, without identification with the body. Yavat, as long as. Yatra, where. Upalabhyeta, he may be found. Tavat, that long. Svatvam, the concept of self. He, indeed. Tasya, of him. Tat, that. Even though one living entity becomes connected with another because of a relationship based on bodies that are perishable, the living entity is eternal. Actually, it is the body that is born or lost, not the living entity. One should not accept that the living entity takes birth or dies. The living being actually has no relationship with so-called fathers and mothers. As long as he appears as a son of a certain father and mother, as a result of his past fruitive activities, he has a connection with the body given by that father and mother. Thus he falsely accepts himself as their son and acts differently. After he dies, however, the relationship is finished. Under these circumstances, one should not be falsely involved with jubilation and lamentation. Purport. When the living entity lives within the material body, he falsely thinks that he is the body, although actually he is not. His relationship with his body and his so-called father and mother are false. Hang on. Well, there's a little bit more to this sentence. His relationship with his body and his so-called father and mother are false, illusory conceptions. These illusions continue as long as one is not enlightened about the situation of the living entity. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Sulakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmaye Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Svayam Rupakada Mahiyam Dadati Svapadantikam Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayati Garim Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Sri Gurum Dinatarinam. So, who is the subject here that's being discussed? Who can tell me? What is the subject? The living entity. Yes, this is not tricky stuff. This is pretty straightforward. The living entity. And of course, that's us. We are the living entities. So, what happens? What's being described here in this verse? What's happening to the living entity? We celebrate it once a year. What's it called? Birth. Yes, birth. We make a big thing about it. Birth. Right? But who is being born, or what is being born? The verse, and Prabhupada is explaining here, that actually the living entity is not born. What is it? Na tveva ham jatu na something like that. The living entity is eternal. But it's the body that is born and ultimately dies, right? What is it? Na sato vijate bhavo na bhavo vijate sataha. Ubayor upadrishtontas tvanayos tattva-darshabhi. This is the vision of the tattva-darshi, one who sees the tattva-darshi. So of the temporary, there is no permanence. Nasat, that which is not permanent, has no endurance. Na sato vijate bhavo, na bhavo vijate sataha. And of that which is permanent, there is no cessation. Right? So we know the body is changing all of the time. And yet we relate to that as the self. It's no wonder that people have mental health problems, because, they think of themselves as something permanent, but everything's changing. Right? And especially, when we get to our teenage years and we think, what the hell is going on around here? Because everything's so confusing. And because, the sense of self, the permanent person, is not identified, is not realized, is not isolated from that which is always changing. Not easily recognizable. Of course, when we meet the devotees, or when we meet somebody who has this vision, tattva-darshi, one who's a seer of the truth or a knower of the truth, they're able to clarify, to shine some light into this darkness of ignorance. But this birth it's an exceptionally powerful experience. In that, even though we are not the body, although even that may be arguable, because our philosophy is achintya bheda abheda tattva. So, yes, in theory we know, and in the Bhagavad Gita we're taught, and here in the Bhagavatam is reinforcing this point, that we're not the body, but at the same time we are the body. Right? Because we're simultaneously one with, but different from. And we know without the presence of the soul in the body, what have we got? Sometimes we see a child is stillborn, which is a tragedy for the parents and the relatives, right? Because the form of the child is complete. But it's not, because the driving force, the living force is not present. Must have been present at some point, but is gone. So the presence of the soul is essential for the body to function, to be, if you like. And the soul's capacity to act and to again be is determined also by the fact that one has a body. If you don't have a body, what are you? Huh? We need a body. This is the interesting paradox of existence. Material existence is, in order to get out of the material world, you need to have a body. No body, what are you? Eh? A ghost, or who knows what. Yeah. Disembodied. Very interesting. Huh? We have to have a body. Which kind of puts pay to the argument, that you're not the body, one sense. And also because, intrinsically, internally, our swarupa actually has form. We're not formless. Right? Our spiritual identity is Satchit Ananda Vigraha, right? It has a form. But this is extraordinarily bewildering, because we are, in essence, separate from the body. And yet, when the soul enters into the womb, and here what is it mentioned here? Evam yoni gato jivaha. Evam, thus, yoni gataha, being within a specific species of life. But the word yoni, the word yoni is being used in that context, in a specific species, but it can also mean within the womb. Right? Yoni means the womb of a mother. Jivaha, the living entity. So when the living entity is placed within the womb of a mother, then the bodily identification starts. Right? From the point of view of the mother and the point of view of the child and the point of view of the father. Right? And it's a strong connection. Right? You can't convince your child that he's not your son, right? Try to convince him that your son that he's not yours. You try to convince your mum that you're not hers. Try that and see what happens when she starts bossing you around. Oh, you're not, I don't belong to you, you can't tell me what to do, I'm an independent living entity who can do what he likes. No, you can't. Get up out of bed, have your breakfast and go to school, right? Go to Bhagavatam class. Right? Very strong binding that we're all caught up in. And it's essential. You know, if your mother just abandons you at birth and says, you're not mine, I have no responsibility for you, right? What happens? These knots or these connections are essential for us to survive, to live. But at the same time, they're not real. That's the amazing. And so the living entity who's taken birth as Harsha is explaining to Maharaj Chitraketu that I've had so many, he explains, I've had so many mothers and fathers. Usually the living entity forgets these things. Right? Sometimes children will have memories of experiences they've had that they can't possibly have in this lifetime. Right? They'll come up with things and the parents will be wondering, where's this child from? Right? And it'll be evident that the child has had experiences in a previous lifetime. Sometimes we see our kids, all the kids when they're very young want to go and bang the mridanga. Have you noticed that? Everybody wants to bang a mridanga. Only some of them is just banging, right? But some children, they'll pick up the mridanga and within a few days, they're playing the mridanga like a champion. Well, where did they get that from? Well, so Harsha explains to Chitraketu that I've had so many. Which mum and dad are you? And in which species? Which species of life? So, depending on the yoni, gataha, the jiva accepts, will determine who he thinks he is. Right? Takes birth in a dog's body, ruff, ruff, thinks he's a dog. Takes birth as a magpie. It's magpie swooping season at the moment. Do you know what that is? It's quite freaky actually. You're riding your bike along and then all of a sudden you hear this and somebody banging on your helmet and it's like, whoa, what's going on? I remember as a kid, I used to go to Mrs. McGuinness's place, especially at shearing time, to watch the shearers shear the sheep. And but at magpie season, I was so scared because I was only 3 or 4 years old. And I used to walk down the road waving a stick around my head. So, magpie attacking the human beings, thinks he's a bird, right? Trying to protect their territory. So depending on which species of life we've taken birth in, even though we've had millions and millions, uncountable numbers of lives, the power of the material energy to have us think in a particular way is insurmountable. Right? Devi hi esha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya. Very difficult to overcome this conception of identity. Yet, the instruction here is that the soul doesn't take birth. It's the body that takes birth. But because we identify so closely with the body, then we think, rather than thinking of ourselves as nityo, as what is mentioned here, nityo nirahankaritaha. We're eternal, he's eternal, sa nityo nirahankritaha. He's eternal and not the doer. Yet when we're born, that's exactly what happens. And you know, there's this, in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada talks about this development of consciousness. And so what's the first stage of consciousness? What's the first stage of consciousness that the living entity experiences? Anamaya, yes, I eat, therefore I am, right? And a child is, you know, the parents spend a good part of their first years of a child's life keeping them full. Stop them crying, because when they're not full and they're hungry, then what do they do? What do they do? Araja? They start crying, yes. The bane of a mother's life is a crying child. Right? I saw it here the other day, one lady who's been coming to the temple for quite some time. And she has 2 very young children, and one's just a baby, and the baby was crying. And she was walking around and inside and outside of the temple, back inside, around a bit more. I'm still crying. So anamaya. And then, and it's interesting because as we develop in the body, and this kind of illustrates how much we're dependent on the body, even though we're not the body, we're still dependent on it, is that as we grow and as we age, then we become more aware of ourselves, right? And so, as a young baby, we need to be fed. You know what one of my earliest memories is? Of a rubber teat on a milk bottle. This is one of my earliest memories. And you know, there's a funny taste in the rubber. Well, I don't know if they make them out of rubber anymore, but there's a funny taste. And I remember, ooh, what's that? This is a very early memory of mine. Ooh, this is not what I usually get. So, you know, this is anamaya. We become aware of things, right? and even how you forget, right? Because we grow suckling, but the memory of your mother's breast is, I can't remember any of that. Right? So what our experience and our memories are selective. It's very interesting. But as we develop, then we become aware. So then what's the next stage of existence? Anamaya, what comes next? Pranamaya, yes. And we identify with what we do. When we ask people, oh, what are you? Then what are we asking them? Basically, who are you? What do you do? What do you do, basically, to identify somebody? What do you do? Oh, I'm a doctor. Ooh, a doctor. Right? Or whatever. So, first of all, our consciousness is absorbed in just, basically surviving. But then as our body and as our consciousness, as our mental and intellectual capacities increase, then we start to identify more with the body and what we do. Then, what's next? Pranamaya? Manamaya. Yeah, this is Descartes' famous statement. I think, therefore I am, right? Which is a more subtle form of existence. And generally, what we think is a reflection of our experiences. But it can be more than that. Because in the mental realm, we can combine and extrapolate and develop ideas and thinkings beyond what we do effectively. Right? Then above Manamaya is and of course in the Manamaya realm we have philosophy, but we also see music and dance and art and so forth. There's a development of a more subtle element of our physical activities. And in that development of consciousness, I guess, if you like, at the same time as we're developing things. And this is one of the reasons why we go to school. Right? That's why we go to school. So that and it takes time. How long does it take for a calf to stand? No, a few minutes sometimes. No more than an hour. Right? But how long does it take for a human child to walk? 2 years. Okay, 1 year. That's a long time, really. It's a long time. And to bring a cow, I guess, to maturity, it's only a few years, right? But to bring a human to maturity and full development of self, if you like, how many years do you think? Yeah, may never happen, right? But in principle, in general, how many years? 25 years? 26 years? 25 years. It takes more or less to grow and to become aware of yourself. Your capacity, your strengths, weaknesses, your natural propensities, and also your desires. Right? 15, 16, 17, and you start becoming unbearable. Yeah. My brother, I went for a ride with my brother when I was in Adelaide the other day, and my brother started complaining about his son. Right? And I could work out from what my brother was saying, most of the fights between Hugo and his parents is over mobile phones. His mobile phone. Right. When we were kids, mobile phones didn't exist. They weren't a problem. It was things like, getting the car, getting the keys of the car off your dad. So, actually, and we analysed all of the problems that my brother was complaining about, and I said, it sounds like you don't have very many problems at all in life, actually. If that's the only problem that you've got with your son, then life's pretty easy. It could be a lot worse. But we see this, as we develop, and there's a whole science to development of a child into an adult, and it's not just the physical, right? It's not just on the prana side, although that's a big part of it, but it's also on the mana, on the mental side, and also jnana, right? Knowledge, which is the next stage of understanding. But jnana means specifically knowledge of the self, not necessarily knowledge of your times tables and A, B, C, D, although that's part of it. We need that development to fully utilise the facilities that are given, especially with the human form of life. So it's interesting, whilst we are not the body, at the same time we need the body and properly developed, right? Why we put so much effort into our children, right? We want to give the children as much opportunity as possible so that they can realise this very point that's being presented here by actually, I'm not sure who's speaking at the moment. Who's speaking? Narada Muni is speaking, right? We put so much effort into maintaining that which is temporary and impermanent, because at the same time we understand the value of the human form of life and the opportunities that it gives us to realise these points of these philosophical points, and not only to realise them but to act on them. So jnanamaya, coming to the realisation that you're not the body, that we're separate from it, is the purpose, if you like, or the opportunity that's given to us in the human form, and why it's so valuable then. And has to be the development of the consciousness is intrinsically linked with the development of the body. by this Krishna's arrangement, right? And this nitya, what is it? Yoni gato jivaha, the form in which he takes at birth, but is not the body at the same time. That's what's being stated here. So in one sense, that bodily identification is to be broken, or not broken, dissolved actually. And so our consciousness, it develops from from Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manamaya, Jnanamaya. The idea is to develop the consciousness of the living entity, the point where one acts on the platform of Anandamaya, which means fully realizing one's spiritual identity and then acting beyond the physical and bodily identification, but acting on the spiritual platform, which is the process of bhakti yoga. So that we can realize this achintya bheda abheda tattva, that on the one hand we are the body, but on the other hand we're not. And in a mature way. It needs to be a mature understanding of these principles. And not developing a notion of false renunciation. Oh, I'm not the body, I'm spiritual, and so therefore I can do what I like, effectively. Even transgress the laws, if you like, of normal discourse, normal behaviour. And we don't overemphasize the point that we're not the body, and so neglect it, or neglect our relationships on the physical in the name of spirituality, but in fact just behave callously towards others, or uncivilly, in an uncivilized way. So, this is a very subtle point. This notion of identity and the notion of self, and how it exists on various levels. But the main purpose, especially of the human form of life, it gives us an opportunity to understand our spiritual identity in amidst all of the other relationships that we have, and how to manage them in such a way so that we're fully cognizant, we're fully leveraging the advantage that comes with the human form of life, and taking our understanding of identity to the point of Anandamaya, or Jnanamaya and Anandamaya, where we understand that we're not the body, that we're spiritual by nature, and that even though we may not be the material body, we actually have a spiritual body. And action on that level of existence is the real purpose of having a material body. Isn't that that's a paradox? And that's what we're doing. We're utilizing these bodies, if you like, and engaging them in Krishna's service so that we can appreciate and understand and realize the fact that we're not the body, ultimately not the body. And that at the end of this lifetime, what happens? What happens? The body dies. We don't die. The body dies. It's finished. And then we get another body. Right? This is our philosophy. If we're pure devotees at the time of, then we get a body in a family of devotees in Goloka or Gokul. Okay, does anybody have any comments or questions on any of these points? Sibya. Hare Krishna. Krishna mentions in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that actually you don't know what you did in your previous life. Right? What is it? What is that verse? No, that's about, what's that verse? Bahuni me vyatitani. Yeah. What's the translation of that verse? Many, many births both you and I have had. I can remember all of them. You cannot. Right? Krishna says. So, very difficult for us to remember our past lives. But we see sometimes. And you know, we know that as we grow and as we mature, then desires for engagement in different activities and have different tastes and different proclivities manifest in a person. And Krishna tells us, you know, we've had many births, and those births are as a result of two things. What are those two things? What do you think, Sibya? Two things. The body is a result of what? What's that? Subtle and gross. Yes. And what's the subtle part? The what? Yes. But first one is desire. Right? We have desires. Have you noticed? You want things. There are some things you don't want, right? Have you noticed that? And there's things that you do want. So we have desires. And then also our karma. I had a desire as a kid to have a Rolls Royce, right? And a Ferrari and a Porsche and whatever else, right? But what did I get? My dad's Holden. So I wanted so many things, but what did I get? I got what I deserved, right? So, you know, there's our desire and our karma. So that determines who we are in one sense, at least from the physical perspective. So, where do those desires come from? Trivia? Where do those desires come from? Yeah, this is our philosophy. So we may not be able to know the details of what happened, but it's very interesting. Prabhupada says that a devotee who's making spiritual advancement knows where they came from and where they're going. Right? One of the purport, was it in the Bhagavatam? Is it? I think it's in the Bhagavatam. So, as we become aware of ourselves, there's the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. We can appreciate who we were broadly in our past life, because that's again being reflected in who we are now, our desires, and what we've earned or what we've received in terms of our karma in this lifetime. And by chanting Hare Krishna and by absorbing ourselves in devotional service, we also get an understanding or an indication of what we'll be in the next lifetime. Is that right? Is that what is happening? I agree with. That's what Krishna consciousness is about, yes. To know who we are, that means we must be a product of what has gone before and where we're going. And, why we do what we do. And especially chanting Hare Krishna. Because that's the means by which we can remove this covering that we've inherited, if you like, from birth. Yoni gato jivaha, right? Born in a particular species of life and thinking, I'm a dog, I'm a cat, I'm a, what is it in the Bhagavatam? Hog, dog, camel and ass. Or in the human form, right? And developing the whole notion of the human form of life is to use it to develop our understanding of our relationship with Krishna, right? Which means if we're engaged in devotional service in this lifetime, we must have had some devotional service in our previous lifetime. Right? Something. Might not have been a lot. Or we're very fortunate in this lifetime. But what do we expect to achieve in the next lifetime? Anybody thought about this? You must be thinking about it. What? More?
If you in this lifetime have the experience of being exposed to devotion and service, so after passing next life we expect to be continued.
Yeah, continue. That's right. Isn't that the plan? Isn't it? Well, yeah, but we'll still have some ego, sense of self. We can't get rid of it, actually. Because in the spiritual platform, that's the real ego, but while we're in the material world, there's going to be some false ego, yes.
Right sense of self.
What's that?
The right sense of self.
Yes, yeah. So how do we understand that we see the skills and talents in somebody in this lifetime? How do we understand them as coming from the previous lifetime? We study the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, and it gives us indication of these things. Plus we see them. Like I said, we see sometimes that the children just pick up a mridanga and they can play it. You know, some kids pick up the mridanga and we wish they didn't. I say, put that mridanga down, will you? You'll break it or whatever, or you'll give me a headache. Right, but some kids pick up the mridanga and then bloop, 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 they're just doing it. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? So we speculate, right? And Prabhupada says there's nothing wrong with speculating based on sound philosophical principles, right? So we surmise, I guess, or we calculate, well, he must have been playing the mridanga in his past life. And he's remembered it. Comes out. Just like, you know, when you're 15 or 16 or 17, you start getting desires that you didn't have when you were, 10. Isn't it? Where did that come from? Where did that come from? Sibya, where does it come from? Yeah, that's our surmisal anyway. That's what the Bhagavatam teaches us, and that's why this section of the Bhagavatam is pretty interesting, because it's explaining to us how the process of transmigration works. And so, you know, this is not something that we believe in, right? We don't just believe in, do you believe in reincarnation? Huh? We don't believe in reincarnation. We're doing it. This is not something we believe in. This is something we do. Anything else? Is that okay, Sibya? Sibya sometimes comes up with some of the smartest questions. Huh? Do you think about this when you're at school, the questions that you're going to ask in the Bhagavatam class? Or they just come out? Good. I think you must have been a devotee in your previous life. What do you think? They're all nodding their heads. What are you doing here anyway? Maru.
I was thinking about the concept that you said, that the evolving of consciousness is intrinsically related to the evolving of the body. So I thought, for common people, we can expect the three stages of consciousness can be applicable, but about beginner mind and under mind, it shouldn't. I'm just wondering, is that also related to the evolving process of the body, that people can experience that?
It can be, but often people just get stuck at a certain point and they don't go any further to the spiritual platform. And so their consciousness is more or less like still yoni gati, right? Still thinking I'm a product of my birth, and that's a strong connection with the physical body. But some people at that at the age of development or maturity into an adult have the desire to understand the spiritual as well, right? We see that. So there's a correlation with the growth, development, emotional, physical, intellectual. But it doesn't necessarily manifest in terms of manamaya, jnana, is it vijnana? And anandamaya. It doesn't necessarily correlate, because some people only get to the jnana on the material platform. They don't go to jnana on the spiritual platform. And they can't. Because of their lack of sukriti from a previous lifetime. And that's why chanting Hare Krishna is so important, right? Because the consciousness of the individual needs to be purified so that it can develop and prasadam, right? The consciousness of the living entity needs to be developed so that they can understand more subtle concepts, ideas on the spiritual platform, and that can be enhanced by agyata sukriti and bhajana mukhi's agyata sukriti, which means devotional activities performed without consciously making a decision, to enhance one's spiritual understanding of things. So that's why we do Harinam, to help people become more purified, which takes time also. But it's done unconsciously, right? Or taking prasadam. And so this is, and that's why, it's explained, this may take lifetimes, because it's a slow process of purification. Is that okay?
Yeah, I was also correlating with what we were talking about, the question of Sivya, in the sense that if, for example, when you say that kids come at early stage, they just Nirvana, or their facility to, the fact that they are listening on these topics, they are more advanced, the opportunity of them to be more exposed to Vijnana and Maya, because the consciousness is evolving.
Yeah, that's right. And, it's interesting because, we philosophically understand these things and even act on those things, but are also still influenced by the body and the consciousness. So, even the girls and the boys in school and even Hare Krishna kids still, behave like kids sometimes. So it's a mix, we're mixed identification. We go to the Bhagavatam class, we talk about you're not the body, but at the same time we also act on the body, because you can't stop it. You know what I mean?
In that case, can we understand that, for example, advanced level of consciousness doesn't mean being detached or distance from what other level of experience? It's more holistic.
It depends on the person, right? I was thinking about this last night. I was going to mention it in class this morning, and I'll do it now. I was thinking of somebody who exemplifies perception of their spiritual identity at birth and even before birth. So I was thinking of Sukadeva Goswami, right? Sukadeva Goswami was completely on the transcendental platform almost at conception, right? And so, his father had to tell him, it's time to take, you've been in your mother's womb for 16 years, it's time to take birth. And he said, well, outside, inside, what does it matter? I'm not part of this world, right? So there are examples of living entities who are so advanced right from the get-go, right? Because of past. Either they're Nityasiddha or otherwise, right? Kripa-siddha or sadhana-siddha. So, Oh, this is the man that's coming to fix up the lighting, the fuses have gone out in our house. So I need to call him back. And this morning I woke up. We isolated the switch that was tripping everything, but then when I woke up this morning, everything's off. The lights are all not working. Right? Yeah, so there are those who are self-realised and only focus on their spiritual identity, like Sukadeva Goswami, right? But then there are those of us who are a bit mixed, right? Mixed. And why we're engaging in devotional service in practice is to develop that deep connection with our spiritual identity, so the other identity doesn't cloud our spiritual identity.
And can we understand that by being engaged in these spiritual practices, like for example, the way how Prabhupada designed our program, that give us the opportunity, even that we have not that awareness, full awareness, that we can experience some levels of ananda sometimes.
Yes, yes.
Because of the process itself.
Yes. And we have the Panchanga Bhakti, which is enthused with prema. And even if you don't have faith in the process, you'll still experience it. Yes, yeah, it's powerful. I better get going. I've got it looks like I've got an appointment with the electrician. Hare Krishna. Gandharaj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai. Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai. Gaura Bhakta Brinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.